All right, so we have our answer key here. As you can see, my answers are in orange, so please follow along. Number one, for the reading guide, you should have had that location. And as you remember, the chapter started off with location, 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 right? Location might be the most important thing that determined the success of civilizations. Number two, did the geography of the areas that civilizations chose to live make them either more or less successful? All right, so you filled in the blank with these. Number three, did the environment of the areas have a huge impact on the way those people lived? Those are two very thought provoking questions that we will continue to analyze and discuss throughout this chapter. Number four, one thing you will notice is that huge civilizations nearly always started near water. All right, and that is very important to remember, really to remember the rest of your life, is that people need water, okay? Specifically, moving water, specifically, big bodies of water, and we will continue learning about that as well. Number five, list four examples of how living next to water is beneficial. You should have had irrigation for crops, provide clean drinking water, used for trade. And then the fourth one was tricky, it is travel. If you thought of another example as your four, that is fine as well. Okay. Number six, list the pros and cons of a civilization being isolated versus a civilization being accessible. So I divided this into 2 points. So isolated, the pros are protected from war. The con is trade was difficult. And your examples for being isolated, a civilization that is isolated is Egypt and China. A civilization that is accessible, the pros were they could easily trade, and con more often attacked. And the example of a civilization for that was Mesopotamia. Number seven, early civilizations began in Mesopotamia around 3500 BC. Number eight, before civilizations could really begin, they needed a stable food supply. All right, now we're going to go through number nine. So there are 7 characteristics of civilization. Describe each one below as it would apply to the state of Michigan. Yesterday, in your reflection, you chose the top 2 characteristics, in your opinion, that are needed for civilization. And then you talked about hopefully why that was important. Okay, we're going to go through these, and in the red font will be the Michigan example, how it applies to the state of Michigan. And then in the orange font is just reiterating what development of cities and what governmental law really mean. So if you want to write down both parts of the information, it will be helpful for you for the test. But again, the orange is just a rephrasing of the book and with a few of my own added teaching points. Okay, so let's go through this together. Development of cities. Michigan example. So you can think about the lumber along the coast of Lake Michigan, which resulted in the growth of Muskegon as well as the growth of Saginaw off the coast of Lake Huron. Another example that I thought of off the bat is Grand Rapids. There's tons of farmland surrounding Grand Rapids, and that agriculture allowed that city to grow. The downtown, specifically, the skyscrapers and all those businesses, that wouldn't be there if there wasn't Hudsonville with all their crops, and Ada. There's a lot of farmland in Ada, Michigan, and Rockford, Michigan. All those surrounding Greater Grand Rapids towns that have a lot of agriculture. It's a great example of how the city of Grand Rapids grew. Remember, it's important for the development of cities with the farmland because then people were able to specialize in other things. We'll talk about that in a second. So, government and law. The Michigan example is our state governor, our state legislation, Congress, etc. We have mayors, we have a city council, the school board members. I mentioned that already. So remember that the more people that live close together, the more problems there will always be, okay? And we see that in different cities throughout the United States. There's a lot more crime in cities than there is in rural areas. Now, this made government and law important. The government figured out how to take care of these sanitation problems and make decisions for the settlement. They kept order. A lot of you guys talked about that in your reflection yesterday, which is really important. Laws are always made to protect and benefit the society as a whole. Okay? System of writing. The Michigan example, we have contracts today. Like I have a teaching contract with the subbing the school that hires me. We have taxes. We have education. So you're using writing. Obviously the language of English, writing. We have bills, medication. We have hospital records. Those are all very important documents. House mortgages, receipts. When you order something off Amazon, Liam Holiday in my classroom, seems to be on Amazon and he likes to order things. He got some wonderful Christmas gifts for his family as well. And he got sent a receipt for all of those things through his email, right? That's a document that records what you did. Emails, like I said. Often we think of writing as sending letters to each other, but really it was created and engineered to keep track of money and how things were bought and sold. All right? Governments wrote down laws. All right? Specialization, this is when the civilization, they had the food, they had the crops going from them, so now people are going to have different jobs, right? And we talked about examples would be priests, soldiers, blacksmiths, and artists. You couldn't have a civilization full of priests or full of artists, right? It just wouldn't work. You couldn't have a civilization where everyone was a soldier. Well, okay, but who's going to grow the food? Who's going to help people live with their day-to-day lives? So everyone contributed in different ways. Michigan examples would be degrees, like college degrees for secondary education. That's the degree I have and all your teachers have. We're able to teach. Some are able to teach K through 12, right? Physical training, nursing school. We have electricians, plumbers, architects. These are people that are specialized in their job. Heating and cooling, the food industry, dairy farms, the fruit agriculture, fruit port, right? It's a lot of fruit. There's a lot of apple orchards. And then the automobile industry is a really big one for the development of Michigan when it became a state, okay? Henry Ford, you might recognize Ford, right? He really built the automobile industry in Detroit, Michigan, all right? And Detroit's known for that. Not so much anymore. There's a lot of cars that are made overseas now. They're made cheaper overseas and then brought into this country, but there are still some automobile industries in the country today. But these are all very important jobs, right? My fiance Sam and I, we recently had a problem at our new house and we needed an electrician. There was no way either of us were going to touch any of those hot live wires. We needed an electrician who knows what they're doing. Otherwise, we could have died. I mean, that's the name. That's just how it works, right? It's electricity. It's dangerous. So they're all very important. Social system. So we want to think of different classes of people. You can picture a triangle with the king on the top, right? So we have wealthy, poor, and we have leaders, we have followers. Examples that we can think of in Michigan, well, you can drive down the street and you see these beautiful big houses on Lake Michigan. Well, 10 minutes later, you can see houses in the city, right? And then 10 minutes later, you can see houses in the suburban Roosevelt Park area, which is probably where most of you live. Maybe not. Maybe you live in the city, or maybe you live on Lake Michigan. And then DeVos and Van Andel are great examples for very, very wealthy and powerful people that built up Grand Rapids, right? We have DeVos Hall, we have DeVos Children's Hospital. Those are people who have tons of money. The Van Andel, the theater, right? They're the Van Andel Arena. So that's a good example of people who have built cities. Leaders would be elected officials in government, local or statewide, right? So we always have leaders. Complex technology. So I had some examples that I thought of for Michigan. For one, the Sioux locks. Okay, so this is a very interesting piece of technology in Sault Ste. Marie. Some of you may have been there before. It's an engineering marvel, according to SaultSteMarie.com. It allows for ships to pass through from Lake Superior to Lake Huron, where originally the water was too shallow for ships, like huge cargo ships, to pass. So when they built the Soo locks, it actually raises the water levels so that ships can pass through. I think that you can go from Minnesota all the way to the Atlantic Ocean because of the Soo locks, okay? Because you go through all the Great Lakes and then you can go up the St. Lawrence River that borders Maine and Canada. All right, and then we have the Ludington Pumped Storage Power Plant. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the power plant in Ludington, but it's a giant battery and it uses the water from Lake Michigan. So the technical term for it is a hydroelectric plant and reservoir. And when it was built in the 1960s, 1970s, it actually was the largest battery in the world, which is really interesting. So, by definition, it's a battery, right? And it powers consumers' energy and all these different power businesses or whatever companies that you have at your house. Okay, so that's another piece of like technology that I thought of. It's a little different than everyone's got a smartphone, like we know that. So, um, I just want to make a note here too, though, that ancient times, the technologies of the ancient times are astounding. We still use these things that they discovered and used today, like wells, water wells. Many of you, I'm sure, have a well, plows, okay, wheels. We use wheels on everything, even our pizza cutters, our wheels. Every little thing is basically has some sort of wheel device to it if you look closely. Any sort of, engineering thing. Arches for bridges, right? Like we couldn't get from Grand Haven to the other side of the channel. What's that? North Ottawa Dunes, right? Unless we had that bridge all the way back in Spring Lake to go across. And then the Great Pyramids. We watched that video yesterday of Babylon, the huge Tower of Babylon. You've never seen anything like that in the United States. I just want to tell you that. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon are one of the most seven wonders of the world, I think, because they were incredible. And that was so long ago. We can't even wrap our head around it. And lastly, organized religion. So the example I thought of for Michigan specifically, Grand Rapids in West Michigan is widely known as a very heavily Protestant area. Grand Rapids, more specifically, is known to be CRC, which means Christian Reformed. And this is due to heavy Dutch settlement and the influence of Holland, though the country of Holland, like the Netherlands. When Michigan was settled, a lot of Dutch came to West Michigan in the Grand Rapids area. So that's why you have Protestant, you have Christian Reformed. We still see other religions as to, or I guess I can't think of the word right now, but different categories of different things and whatever. But important to note that all civilizations worshipped gods and had organized religion. Many gods had stories and narratives that the people believed in. They had specific powers. Like there was, like the video talks about the god of farming and other things like that. So civilizations worshipped these so that good things would happen for them. This brought people together, but it also divided civilizations, and that still happens today. What has happened throughout history is still happening today. It just looks a little different than what we learn about in the classroom. So it's fun and it's interesting sometimes to try to figure out how what we're learning about ancient history applies today, because it always will. We can always make connections. Organized religion was often the identity of the civilization. So that's just important to know. Let me know if you have any other questions on those. Remember, this is your unit vocabulary, and that is your Quizlet for the bottom for studying purposes. Awesome. Thanks, guys.